With me at our London ECFR offices is Yahuda Shaul. Yahuda Shaul is a founder and today co-director of Breaking the Silence, which is an Israeli NGO, and you're going to talk to us a little bit about Breaking the Silence, about the situation right now in Israel, Jerusalem, the territories, and a bit about the work and the testimonies from Breaking the Silence. Yehuda, tell us very briefly about Breaking the Silence.
Breaking the Silence, we're a group of a bit over 1,000 men and women who served in the IDF and the Israeli army from the beginning of the Second Intifada to today. And we speak out about our experience. We've served in the occupied territories, we've been there, we've done it, we've seen what it is. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to start a debate about the moral price tag of maintaining a permanent occupation over another people. We're a bunch of veterans who believe that our military should be an instrument of defense and not an instrument of oppression and occupation. Yeah. Don't get me wrong, we're not pacifists. We just believe in this weird concept that people should govern themselves and not be ruled by a foreign army, especially not if it's our army. And that's why we're breaking the silence. We're trying to scream about the fact that the occupation is destroying the morality of the IDF. It's destroying the morality of Israeli society. It's destroying the professionalism of the IDF. This is not what armies are supposed to do, to rule civilians forever. And ultimately, long-term, strategically, politically, it's destroying the political legitimacy of the State of Israel. And that's why it has to end.
So we had a conversation here at ECFR, at our London headquarters, about the work you've done, about what's going on in the West Bank, Gaza, but also about the situation right now. We're talking some weeks into what seems to be a new level of escalatory violence, and you reflected on that. Share with us your sense of what is going on at the moment and where this might be leading, or what has caused this new escalation, especially in Jerusalem.
I think basically, sadly enough, what we see in the past few weeks in East Jerusalem, in the West Bank and inside Israel is we see the price of the status quo. And the status quo is not a frozen reality, it's an entrenchment of Israel's military rule over Palestinians. And it's not only an expansion of settlements, yeah? It's ultimately absolute military rule over Palestinians. And it is sad to say, but anyone who thought that Palestinians forever would agree to live under our boots and under our fist is basically proven wrong in these last few weeks. I think giving context is not about justifying things, but it's about explaining things. And what we see is, we see how Palestinians are responding every once in a while with another rounds of violence to the occupation, to the big picture. This is the price of the one-state reality, yeah, of the promise that Bibi Netanyahu, our Prime Minister, has to us, that we will just continue forever to rule Palestinians.
And Jerusalem as really a focus for the current.
Yeah, you looked at the stabbing attacks, about 80% of Palestinians who stabbed Israelis, soldiers and settlers and civilian citizens inside Israel, coming from East Jerusalem, and I think it's no wonder, because ultimately Palestinians in East Jerusalem, in many aspects, feel the occupation even more than Palestinians in Ramallah. Yeah, Palestinians in Ramallah don't have day-to-day military presence in their streets. They don't have the day-to-day routine of house demolitions and these kind of stuff, this intervention in your day-to-day life, while in East Jerusalem they do have. And we see a huge surge in settlements in East Jerusalem. We see what happened in Temple Mount, but first and foremost we have the status quo that these people live in, which is a reality of discrimination, a reality of military intervention, of border patrol in their life. And for years we've been told that cutting the West Bank or cutting East Jerusalem from the West Bank has worked. Yeah, Palestinians ultimately in East Jerusalem will forget that they are Palestinians, they'll become Israelis, yeah, and we'll just go on and everything will be okay, and we are proving wrong.
The other issue another issue that you've done a lot of work on, and in this current round of escalation there have been some marches to the fence in Gaza, is Gaza, and you collected a book of testimonies of Israelis who served during the summer 2014 Operation Protective Edge, as it was called in English, in Gaza. Briefly sum up for us what your findings were, which suggested that actually things are getting worse in terms of what happens when there is a military escalation in Gaza?
So I think military escalations in Gaza, like protective edge last summer, are in a way of the same nature of what's happening now in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem. This is the one-state reality. This is the status quo, and every few years we're going to have these rounds. And we've seen, protective edge, the operation in Gaza last year. In 2012, we had Operation Pillar of Defense. In 2009, we had Operation Cast Lead. And we really see the escalation from one operation to the other. Where the previous one ended is where the next one starts, and where the next one ends is where the next, And that is something that is very, very clear. Not only in the results and the damage to Palestinians, but also in the rules of engagement and the way the military behaves.
Just briefly unpack for us, by way of closing, that escalation in the rules of engagement as you defined it.
So what we basically see is, from analyzing testimonies of over 70 officers and soldiers who were in Gaza last summer, is that the massive amount of civilian casualties in Gaza last summer, we're talking about over 2,000 Palestinians, mostly civilians, about 500 children. The massive level of destruction of civilian infrastructure and property, we're talking about 18,000 Palestinian apartments destroyed, is not a mistake, it's not a coincidence. It's a direct result of the rules and the way we conducted the operation. We're basically using indiscriminate weapons such as artillery in one of the most densely populated areas like Gaza, and giving rules of engagement to soldiers that in order to shoot at people, it's not only if someone threatens your life directly, but sometimes you can do it just because someone is in an area that you warned and asked civilians to leave, and he stayed there. It was enough to become a legitimate target for the IDF. In terms of targeting people from airstrikes, not always based on intelligence that you had, but sometimes just based on their behavior that seemed to you suspicious as you watched it from the sky through a drone or chopper or whatever. So what has happened is that if once upon a time, in order to turn someone into a legitimate target, you needed to pose a threat, you needed to have direct intelligence. In order to minimize the risk to our troops to zero at all cost, we basically don't ask any more questions. And the modus operandi of how you run the operation is you ask civilians to leave with leaflets, you break into radio broadcasts in the area, ask civilians to leave an entire town, an entire village, give them a deadline, and once that's over, anyone who stays becomes a legitimate target. Any building in the area, unless it's like a hospital or a UN compound, becomes a legitimate target.
Breaking the silence, testimonies of soldiers who've served in the territories are available. People can look that up. Yahuda Shaul from Breaking the Silence, thanks so much for being with us at ECFR.
Thank you.